Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dan Nguyen, and I have a very special guest with me today. He is an attorney, a bankruptcy attorney and business litigation attorney coming up on 15 years. I've worked with him and sent him clients, and he's worked with business bankruptcies and personal bankruptcies. I wanted to bring him on here and talk a little bit about some things about bankruptcy in light of what's going on with COVID-19. So I want to welcome to the guest, Amit Bahadori.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Sure, my pleasure. And so, some people already reached out to me. As you know, a lot of people had to shut down their businesses due to the shelter in place, and especially the restaurants, they're hurting.
Yes.
And so I've got requests like, hey, if we can't get any stimulus or can't get enough or get customers, we're gonna have to file for bankruptcy. So I want to bring you onto the show today and talk a little bit about business bankruptcies, personal bankruptcies, and what do you see coming out of this. And I know you've done bankruptcy for a while. You've kind of lived through the 2008 financial crisis and having helped people go through bankruptcy through there, and maybe some of the things that are similar and some of the things that are different. So let me start with the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you became an attorney.
Sure. So just to give a little bit of background, as you mentioned, I've been practicing law for close to 15 years. And I would say about 10 of those years have been more focused on bankruptcy work. I started off being a lawyer through the litigation route and did litigation for a number of years. And, as you mentioned, the crisis, the 2008 through roughly 2011, 12 crisis, led me into the field of bankruptcy, just because it was going on around me. Clients of mine were inquiring about it. It just seemed logical to get to know about, this area of the law. So since about 2010 through today, a large percentage of my practice has been dedicated to bankruptcy, and I would say it looks like it'll continue to be dedicated, just given the current circumstances. And I've represented, a variety of clients, individuals, families, and businesses, both small to medium-sized businesses. So that's roughly, what my practice is based on. It's more of a consumer side bankruptcy, and from just what I'm gathering now, we're starting to see a lot of specific industries, obviously, just very negatively impacted by this pandemic. As you mentioned, restaurant industry, also the retail industry and hospitality. So it'll be interesting to see how things, proceed forward, from here on. But we'll see where things take us.
Yeah. So I know when you started your career, you started off at a firm. What made you decide, hey, it's something I want to do full time and have my own practice?
So I was practicing with a fairly medium-sized firm. I'd say roughly 100 attorneys for about 4.5 years before I struck out on my own. And what led me to that decision, really I think it was really a combination of seeing my peers, some of my peers start their own practices, seeing them flourish, seeing them, gain, a lot of control and build their business and approach things from a different, mindset, from more of an entrepreneurial mindset than, being more of a just kind of a day-to-day attorney working for a firm, which there's definitely nothing wrong with that either. And that's, fits certain people's personalities great. For myself, I've always been more inclined, more of a, entrepreneur and more inclined to do my own thing from a business perspective. So it was natural for me to strike out on my own. And I knew, I think when I started practicing, even with the firms, that eventually my plan was to go out on my own and start my own business. it was just a matter of timing, gathering the requisite experience that I felt, gave me enough confidence to be able to, practice on my own. And then that combination of having to be the right time where I'm seeing, like I said, peers of mine go out, start their own practices, discussing with more senior attorneys who had been practicing for 20, 30 years, and getting encouragement from them. I think that kind of pushed it over, and allowed me to make that decision, and then started my practice in 2010, January 2010, struck out on my own.
So you kind of been on your own almost 10 years now. And we talked a little bit about the 2008 financial crisis. So obviously we're kind of seeing the crest of the wave coming up for COVID-19. But what are the similarities you're seeing between what happened then and what's going on right now?
Well, with the prior crisis, a lot of it was driven by the real estate market, and I think during that time when that wave hit, many of the problems that the filers were facing had to do with the mortgages, not being able to afford their housing, and loss of valuation in their properties, loss of valuation in their retirement accounts. So I think that wave was definitely more property centric. It lent itself to a lot of Chapter 13 bankruptcies, which are specific type of bankruptcies that allow you to catch up with arrears on your mortgages, allow you to restructure your mortgages. So I think there were a lot of those cases during that time period that really drove the filings. With the current crisis, which I think is still very new and nascent, and we have yet to see how it'll take shape. But I think we're seeing at least the sources of this, driven by the lack of economic activity in the industries that I mentioned, and I think we're seeing this oncoming economic recession or depression really hitting the type of workers and the type of jobs that are really service driven or consumer driven and face-to-face driven, which I think in turn will eventually impact their the housing market, because it tends to trickle in a way where people can't pay their mortgages, or and it eventually, I think, will hit the housing market. So what I'm expecting is we'll see a lot more Chapter 7 type bankruptcies, where it'll start with people trying to just discharge their either business debt or personal guarantees they have on businesses and try to restart anew, followed by more of a housing influence type of bankruptcy scene with the Chapter 13s and so forth.
Yeah. So, you mentioned Chapter 7s and then Chapter 13s. Tell us a little bit of the differences between those two. And I believe those are personal, and then business have different chapters, right?
Yes. They're both both Chapter 7 and 13 can be filed personally. Businesses can file Chapter 7 as well. For businesses, you will typically see either Chapter 7 or Chapter 11 bankruptcy. For individuals, you're mainly looking at Chapter 7s and 13s. An individual can do a Chapter 11 as well, but it's a bit more rare. It's more high net worth, individual filings. But Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 are the two most common types of bankruptcies. And what differentiates them are, a number of factors, but mainly, if to put it in basic, simple terms, in Chapter 7, you're seeking to discharge, in other words, eliminate all of your debt, where in a Chapter 13, you're seeking to enter into a payment plan where you're paying back a portion, all or a portion of that debt, your cumulative debt, over a certain number of years. And the typical Chapter 13 plan is a 5-year plan where people are paying back their debt. And why would anyone choose to do a payment plan versus a complete elimination of debt? has a lot to do with just being able to qualify for a Chapter 7 versus a 13. Whereas in a Chapter 13, it's more, you're dealing with disposable income, a little bit higher of a income threshold, and an ability to pay back, the debt versus, just really a drop in income and inability to pay the debt, little to no disposable income.
Okay. So would you say like most people probably start off in 13 and maybe the courts say, or the trustee says, hey, I think you make too much money, or like you didn't lose that much.
Sure.
Like, we're going to put you on a 13 because, maybe a 7 is, I don't know if a word is unfair, but like maybe more appropriate.
Yeah,
So,
it does happen. I mean,
okay.
you're supposed to really qualify the case in advance of filing. So in that decision making between the 7 and 13, you're typically evaluating already
Okay.
the total income. There's something called the means test, which is a test that was enacted by the legislature. It's a bankruptcy budget test where we evaluate, or the code evaluates your income versus your allowed expenses, and that issues its own disposable income number amount. And by running that test, you essentially evaluate whether the filer should be in a 7 or a 13. But that being said, I have had cases, and I've heard of other cases where maybe it starts out as a 7, but then somewhere along the process, either maybe there's more income has been generated, or there's certain expenses that the trustee just will not accept, and the filer is requested to convert to a 13,
Yeah.
or sometimes it's just dismissed as a whole. But that's something that comes up every now and then. But
Okay. So I mentioned before, a lot of my clients, they own their own businesses, and they have personal guarantees. So how, and you talk about Chapter 7 and discharging those personal guarantees. So how does it work with, if someone has a business, maybe LLC, a corporation, maybe they're an owner, or maybe there's only a handful of owners, and that business is going under, and there's a personal guarantee because they have a 20,000 square foot restaurant or real estate space, right? Do they both, as a business and them, do they file for bankruptcy, or how does that come into
yeah,
play?
yes. I mean, the personal guarantee is really it's a tough one to deal with, because it does it does tie the individual. It does make them liable for the debts of the business. So in a situation where there is no personal guarantee, the business itself can file bankruptcy, and depending on if there are any assets, those are distributed. If not, you're just closing up shop in a Chapter 7. You're closing up shop, and the individual walks away. But more often than not, with leases and even lines of credit, a personal guarantee is required. So even if there is a bankruptcy filed for the business, the individual, many times will have to file as well. But it does create, there is a little bit of, I guess, a gap there where you can try to negotiate with the creditor, let them know, look, the business it's going under, we're closing shop, we're filing bankruptcy. We understand there's a personal guarantee, but if there's anything we can do to negotiate this debt, to relieve the personal guarantee, that's something that we see. Or sometimes just the personal guarantee is negotiated and some lesser amount is paid, because a lot of creditors know that if the business is filing bankruptcy, the individual, it's not long before the individual is looking to do so.
Okay. So you mentioned, the business closing a shop. What are the benefits? Let's assume there's no personal guarantee and there's no personal liability of the business owner out, from the business. What's the benefit of the business filing, let's just say a Chapter 7, versus just like, all right, forget it, I'm going to walk away from everything and not do anything?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of time there seems to be, there's a difference of opinion, I would say, out there on how businesses should deal with, closing down. One school of thought is, a business will just unwind and then they'll dissolve, And depending on whether there's money in the bank to pay vendors, creditors, and so forth, some arrangement will be reached, and the creditors will be, dealt with according to how much assets there are in the business, and then you just dissolve. In those situations, a bankruptcy really is probably not necessary. Uh, Bankruptcy really, I think it's more appropriate in circumstances where there are a lot of creditors. It's maybe a more complicated situation from an asset perspective. For example, I had recently, I had a case, and it was a restaurant that was filing Chapter 7, and the restaurant had a lot of kitchen equipment, a lot of items that could be liquidated. And instead of really going through the process and doing a private liquidation, it just seemed easier to do a bankruptcy, let the trustee deal with the liquidation, and it's just more of a structured environment where you can, have a structured liquidation and payment of creditors, and it's over at that point.
Okay, so let's maybe talk about some of the misconceptions about bankruptcy, and can you share a little bit about some of the things, the most common things you've seen come across, in front of your desk or in your office that you're like, hey, no, this is way wrong.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people, have misconceptions just about. I mean, there's a lot of stigma, I guess you can say, with the bankruptcy. So that's one thing that we deal with. There's a lot of, feelings that, tied up with failure, with, a sense of a disappointment. And, there's a good amount of that. And that's one level of really counseling the client. And, what I've started to do on, my Instagram page is on Mondays, I started to post, maybe a short little biography or profile about a famous individual or successful individual who has filed bankruptcy in the past. So the first one we did was Walt Disney, and then yesterday's post was for Hershey, who had filed bankruptcy twice, and used the bankruptcy system to protect his core assets, discharge a debt, and then get back into business. And it was the third time that he was able to really get out there and become successful. So part of my job is counseling the client and trying to mitigate and limit that sense of failure. Because there are plenty of people that are successful that did get up, and they use that bankruptcy as a tool and not as a reflection of themselves. So I think separating that from the emotional aspect is one thing that we deal with commonly. But there are many other misconceptions. I mean, on all ends of the spectrum. I mean, there's people that feel bankruptcy is going to ruin their credit, that they'll never be able to get a loan again, or that they'll have to forfeit their car, their house. Those are extreme positions. And I can get into that and the detailed credit impact and so forth either later now or some other time. But on the other end of the spectrum, what we deal with are people who think that they can just file bankruptcy and do get away with anything, or not pay anyone back and keep assets, or that they can for example, use their credit card and run up a big bill and then just file in the following month. So there are many regulations in place to prevent against that kind of fraud. But I would say more often we see the client that thinks that the bankruptcy is going to impact them harder than it really ends up impacting. Because I do get calls from clients even 1 to 2 years out who have significantly increased their credit score. 2 years out, I hear people having 700 credit scores and above. There's a newsletter that I'm starting as well for anyone that wants to go to the website and sign up. It's basically more of a credit repair, things to do after bankruptcy, because I've found that a lot of clients are interested in knowing, okay, we know about bankruptcy, what the effects are. Now, what do we do after the fact? So there's a lot of information on that out there too, just on the internet. But I'm trying to focus on providing that information for free to whoever's interested.
Okay. Yeah, you addressed some really good points. Is for a lot of people, fear bankruptcy. It's kind of a loss of status, especially for very successful business owners, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then I remember, 2008, people were, after they lost their homes, but they were qualifying for loans like 2 years later to buy
Mhm.
another
Mhm.
house from the stack of cash they
Yeah.
had in their
Yeah.
mattress. So
That's
yeah,
true.
it's kind of amazing how it's bankruptcy is not maybe not as bad as most people think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, every situation is different. I mean, if someone wants to, really needs to buy a house in a year, and it's really important to have good credit, bankruptcy might not be the best solution for them. Or certain people have certain occupations
Mhm.
where it's difficult for them, or where it's required for them to have a good credit
Yeah.
profile. So in those situations, obviously, we look at other ways to try to deal with the problem.
So let's talk a little bit about that, and let me know if you've come across something like that. So I know in a lot of licensed professions, when you're like renewing or you have to submit applications to certain
Right.
organizations, they'll ask like, have you had to file for bankruptcy? So have you run
Right.
across something like that, and how have you counseled clients either you got to do it and just bite the bullet, or hey,
Mhm.
let's I think you can not file and maybe save your license or stay in business.
Yeah, I've dealt with both of those situations. I think with like financial planners, it's they have very strict regulations to follow. I mean, it's a high expectation. So for people like financial planners or others in those type of licensed professional professions, I tend to counsel against filing and maybe finding other ways, because that tends to be their main ability to generate source of income. So we definitely want to be sensitive to that. In other professions, I've dealt with some clients that it's they work for the government. There's maybe they're a government contractor, or there's some other, they're working in some other capacity where it's required for them to meet a certain threshold, or maybe they're asked about if they've filed bankruptcy. Every year they do a review or something like that. But it's not necessarily critical for them to maintain that excellent credit. In those situations, it's better to be upfront with it, deal with the employer, let them know the situation. And we found that the employers have been sympathetic to those situations. I mean, ultimately, the employer knows that the person is working, that there's some income. There's usually, the reason for filing is something that has to do with a more personal issue, or it could be an investment issue, and it's something that we can work through. But I would say with those professionals, like the financial planners, I think it's a little bit more difficult, and you definitely want to avoid filing if you can.
Yeah. So when is the right time for someone to at least call someone like you, right? Because I know sometimes there's a too late to the time, and maybe there's too late. Like when's like the appropriate time to reach out to somebody and say, hey, I'm thinking for bankruptcy. I need to consult with you.
I mean, I think the earlier the better, really. I
Mm.
mean, if there's a sense that, if there's a job loss, or, there's, awareness that, it's going to be a tight financial situation coming up the next few months, I would say it's better to just get ahead of it. And, we offer, 30-minute consultations, for free. Usually we can answer most of the questions, in that time frame. A lot of times, people call and they just they're not ready to file, but we just keep in touch, and maybe they'll sign up and for the newsletter. I'll give them information. We'll keep a constant communication thread, and then when the time is right, they'll feel more prepared and ready. But as far as timing wise, I think sooner than better. It's better to prepare than to have to deal with, let's say, a judgment or a wage garnishment, where your income, your paycheck is getting garnished, and then you have, a very short period of time to file. Those are cases that, typically it's better to try to avoid that if possible.
Yeah. So I remember back in 2008, we start seeing these bandit signs right off the freeway. It says, "Hey, file for bankruptcy," like 599.
Right.
So like, what are, I don't know if those are attorneys or not, but like, what, is that something, those are legitimate, not legitimate? Um,
Sure.
if they are, like, what should we look for in a bankruptcy attorney? Because, 2008, it was like a dime a dozen for bankruptcy attorneys.
Hmm.
So, what makes a good bankruptcy attorney?
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess you want me, I can go into the first part of the question. I
Yeah.
guess that
Yeah.
lends itself to the second.
Yeah.
I've seen I've seen some signs. It's been a while since I've seen it, but sometimes you see some signs on the side of the road that say, Chapter 7 bankruptcy, $400, $700. The number, I think it was like 900 and it just went down. And then like 400.
The race at the bottom, who can charge the cheapest?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, that first of all, that fee doesn't always reflect all of the parts of the bankruptcy. So and you're not always getting an attorney. So sometimes it would be maybe someone like a bankruptcy petition preparer, someone that would just it's a 400, they'll just help you fill out the paperwork, but then you're on your own at appearing at the court. Certain legal questions they can't really counsel you on. If there's anything that's more than filling out the paperwork, there's additional fees, or you get referred to an attorney or something like that. I'd be very just wary of that type of marketing. I mean, I think you can kind of sense when something's a scam, or when something's too good to be true, or priced too low. We get calls from people that say, I have a very straightforward bankruptcy. I see the other guys he's charging $500. Why are you charging, 3 times that? I have to explain to them. I mean, there's a lot of times when you see these fees, they don't include things like, having a reaffirmation agreement to make sure that your car, is reaffirmed and it keeps getting reported on your credit, or certain things that end up getting charged for piecemeal, so that you see some of the more legitimate, attorneys, they may say $900, but you want a reaffirmation agreement, it's another $300. If you want that court appearance, it's another, $250, and then that price really adds up to be what's more or less the market rate for a bankruptcy. So as far as how to distinguish between who to go for and who you want to retain, I mean, part of it I think is you do want to do kind of the more objective test. How long have they been practicing? Are they familiar with bankruptcy enough? How many cases have they done? Hundreds or thousands of cases. Or are they just starting right now because they've heard bankruptcy is a hot area? Something like that. So you want someone that has some degree of experience. I mean, that's always usually a good factor. But does it necessarily need to be someone with 30 years experience? Maybe not. But you do want to kind of run that test by them. But beyond that, I think you want an attorney that's going to pay an individualized, give individualized attention, and is not going to treat the case like just a kind of a filing a mill might do. Where you're just basically they're not even filing. Some of the cases don't fit into the cookie cutter mold, and usually the clients that I've spoken to that have been with other attorneys that have been unhappy, it's usually been tied to feeling like there wasn't enough attention given by the attorney to that individual's situation, and in some cases maybe they never even met the attorney. Everything was done remotely. At the 341A hearing, it was a different, someone like an appearance attorney showed up, which is, none of that, is necessarily bad, as long as there's a degree of individualized attention to the case. You want to at least have talked to your attorney and had at least one, if not
Right.
more, vetting session or one-on-one session. So that's what I would look for. And, pricing wise, some attorneys were charging, higher than, even what they should. I do want to talk one thing about the pricing, because there has in the past year to 2 years or so, there has been somewhat of a trend with the bankruptcy in the bankruptcy system, where you're starting to see more and more of what's called bifurcation of the bankruptcy retainer agreement, which is essentially what it means is you'll get you're hiring an attorney to perform some pre-petition services at a lower rate, or a very low rate, sometimes zero rate, and then you're executing a post-petition agreement with them, to where you're basically charging the client for your services after the filing. So that allows you to essentially break up the fee, so the client doesn't necessarily need to pay the full fee in advance of filing. So that's opened up a whole cottage industry. I mean, there are now companies that will, finance this, which will allow attorneys to do a very low, like filing fee down, like $335 down, or even less than that. Will file your bankruptcy, and then they, you get put on a payment plan, where the filer is now paying, the filing fee, balance of the filing fee, which, $1,500 to $2,000 or whatever. I'm just throwing numbers out there, spread out over a year. So it's effectively, it's less than $200 a month. That's a trend that we're starting to see. The good thing about that is it allows a filer to start rebuilding some credit immediately after filing, because now
because that's reported as to the credit reporting agencies, right?
Yeah. So it's a way to start building credit. On the flip side, if you miss those payments, the law requires you to, if you're going to report the good, you have to report the bad. But some of the companies that I've at least dealt with, they've been very good at having the clients maintain those rates, and they're very non-aggressive, and they're not reporting to credit right away. They're trying to get the client on track. So that's I think been beneficial to a lot of potential bankruptcy filers who just couldn't afford the full fee up front. So,
okay, that's good to know. So you mentioned about fees. Assuming they could afford the fee up front, I think you might get this question a lot. Can I discharge the fees I pay to you in the bankruptcy you file for me?
You mean in terms of, like, if they do one of these bifurcated, where
bifurcated or not, right? So I've got, like, hey, since I'm going to pay you $1,500 already, can I? I mean, I know it's kind of good for you.
Well, yeah, no, that's actually a very valid point. Well, okay, if you're going to pay me the money like in advance, then the debt's already been paid, so there's nothing to discharge. But in these situations I'm talking about, these bifurcations, these are situations where that post-petition filing, the post-petition fee, technically it becomes post-petition, so you can't discharge that.
Right, because it's only anything before the petition is filed that you can discharge, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. Okay. So, hey, you mentioned your Instagram. It's been where if we want to learn more about you and watch your stories, like, where can we find you?
So if you can go to my Instagram, it's ATB Bankruptcy Law, and I try to update information on there at least a few times a week. But I am going to start posting videos and doing some more informational stuff on there. So I think that's probably a great place to find me. That's got my website link on there. Website is we're retooling it a little bit so we can have it be a little bit more user friendly, or in terms of having being able to interface more with the user. I would like to have something on the website by the end of the month, where someone visiting can basically run some sort of soft means test and see, do they qualify for 7 or 13?
Okay.
At least as a general idea, without being, too specific.
Yeah, and I'll share the links to your website and the Instagram page on the show notes. All right, so we're going to go into some rapid fire questions here. So just answer what first pops into your head.
Okay.
Right? Who's your role model?
My role model, as cheesy as it sounds, my dad is my role model. he's kind of he's got the very classic, I think, immigrant entrepreneurial story. Came to this country, in his, I think, graduate school years. He was in the medical field, laboratory sciences, eventually started his own laboratory. And I just remember seeing him as a young age, him and my mom, working, building this company, which, it kept them in business and kept people employed and, provided a source of income for family for many years. So, and he was always dealt with the utmost integrity in his business. So that's something that, I really look up to, because I do see my dad as someone that did business the right way, even while there were, a lot of shady things going on in the laboratory business, like sharing fees and things like that maybe, got certain people ahead, but he just kind of never went for that.
All right. So what's the best business book you've ever read?
That would probably be a book that I read. I first read in my senior year of high school in my Model United Nations class, and the book was called Getting to Yes, which it's more of a negotiating book, I guess, than anything else. That book I really like that book because it teaches you to kind of separate the person from the problem and focus on things in a more of an objective way, and how you can get further in negotiations if you're taking that type of approach versus more of a forceful approach that kind of reminiscent of signing up for the gym or something like that. Being forced into the big package.
Yeah. All right. What's the best business advice you've ever received?
I think the best business advice I received was really it's a very simple premise, but it's identify the problem and find the solution. And as long as you do that, you're always going to be in business, and that can take many different forms. It doesn't need to be something as explicit as we're in a pandemic and we need more masks. That's an obvious problem. But even within our own businesses, what's the problem and how do I fix it? What's the solution to it? So, like I said, fairly basic advice, but something that's pretty key.
All right. If you could do one thing over again, what would it be?
I mean, it would probably be to start getting on the social media earlier. Start doing more digital, having more of an online presence earlier. And I know you were a bit of a trailblazer in that area. So, so definitely, something that, and I don't think it's, never too late, right? So we're, definitely trying to do that now, but, it would have been good to have a head start on that.
All right. And so final question is, you lose everything and the only thing you have is your phone, your computer, and an internet connection. How do you rebuild your business in 30 days, which may or may not include bankruptcy?
Right. Well, as long as I have my phone and my, and my computer, especially, well, definitely the internet, start leveraging contacts, really. I mean, I think in this pandemic, we realize how much, we rely on these devices, how much we can leverage them. So it would really be, it's probably not too much different than what I'm doing now. Try to offer advice, information to a problem, do it on some sort of platform to get out there to the public, and then be available to answer those questions, directly when they want to call you.
All right. Hey, thanks again, Amit Bahadori. You can find him on Instagram and look for Bahadori Law on the internet for Bankruptcy Attorney. Thanks again for your time, and you stay safe out there.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. My pleasure.